This is the way. Oh, ho, ho. Greetings, Bucketheads. Mevar Tagar. Welcome to our 263rd spastically sped up fighting episode of Mandovision. Now, I'm your host, Nargai Tom, and thank you so much for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. We're so glad you're here. And in case you don't know by the tone of my voice, this is Mandovision After Dark, as I once again record under the cover of night. Reach out to us on the socials. You know where to find us. We're at Mando_Vision on Twitter and Instagram. You can email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. All right, Bucketheads, we're back. We're here to talk about the 5th episode of Star Wars, The Acolyte. And there is certainly a lot to get into. I found this episode to be kind of what I think a lot of us Star Wars fans have been waiting for. The action is upon us. And while there were, or at least was a reveal of sorts, as far as one of our mysterious elements to the story, I think what most people will be talking about is the body count in this episode, because while the episode might be titled Night, they might as well have called it Everyone Dies, because, oh boy, there is death galore in this episode, and I am here for all of it. But before we get into all that, I do want to take a minute and address the controversies of last week's episode. And it was foolish of me to think that why would people, react the way that they chose to react to the appearance of Ki-Adi-Mundi in the end of the High Republic era. You, dear listeners, supporters of this podcast, you know my thoughts. You know I've gone on this, not quite a tangent, but I've put it out there before. I've made my feelings known on the matter. That canon is only canon until someone decides that it's not canon, and that's exactly what we had here with Ki-Adi-Mundi. People getting worked up all into a lather, into a froth, if you will, about Ki-Adi-Mundi, with information based on stuff that's not even canon anymore. The little bit, everyone, so many Star Wars podcasters and YouTubers and everything have posted the information, so this is not a revelation. But it's not all that stuff that the angry people were citing is it's not canon anymore. Disney threw it all out. So Ki-Adi-Mundi's lore around him, around the Syrian species, is kind of unknown, kind of up for grabs, kind of up for reinterpretation. But as we've said before on this podcast, the TV shows and the movies will always kind of have the ability to overwrite what we know from the comics, what we know from the novels, and everything else. And, we don't have to agree with it. We don't have to support that. It's just sort of the way it is. So Ki-Adi-Mundi showing up last week wasn't a big deal to me, because I guess I'm just used to this by now. Thinking back on things, I remember when George Lucas himself was the one doing these things, when he was the one throwing out what was being written in books and stuff like that, because it didn't suit his story. And by and large, I understood what he was doing, because, again, think about it. If you're in my age bracket, you guys kind of grew up with the same Star Wars stuff that I did, right? The 90s come around, and we finally start getting some new Star Wars content. We're getting the comic books from Dark Horse. We're getting the Bantam novels, like the Timothy Zahn stuff, The Heir to the Empires. All those books are coming out. And then, 7-8 years down the line, Lucas is going to tell his prequels. Oh, that's great. But while Lucasfilm did a good job of sort of steering writers away from saying too much about the time before the episodes 4, 5, and 6, it wasn't a flawless thing. Timothy Zahn himself made speculations and wrote about cloning cylinders and things that would later become invalidated. Uh, it's sort of par for the course for Star Wars, and then Filoni and Lucas, in the height of the Clone Wars, they go and undo what we think we know about Mandalore from the Karen Traviss novels. So it's not new for this to happen. Uh, I think I was just sort of surprised by the amount of vitriol that was sort of thrown at this show, because Ki-Adi-Mundi, of all people, got everyone beyond riled up. I found the whole situation laughable, but of course, the we'll just call it the toxic element of the fandom. Use this as their next thing to attack the Acolyte. And again, you don't have to like the Acolyte. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and that's cool. Like there's now enough Star Wars content out there that we can choose the things that we're enjoying the most and support those things. We don't have to tear down the ones that we don't like because it doesn't fit with our ideals of what Star Wars is and should be. So we have a very short tolerance for that on this podcast. So again, I was sort of surprised, but I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by people lashing out and rallying to the defense of Ki-Adi-Mundi, of all people. Now, the other side of the coin on the Ki-Adi-Mundi argument, okay, because again, most people were fired up about his age, blah, 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 blah. But there is also the element of him in the Phantom Menace saying that the Sith haven't been seen in over a century, or blah, 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 blah. Well, give these people time to tell their story. Based on this episode right here alone, there's not going to be many people left to talk about this particular quote-unquote Sith, if that's who and he truly, in fact, is, if that's the route they decide to go. We'll talk more about that as we get into the episode in particular. But I did want to sort of address that because, again, you listened to my show last week, and I was like, hey, Ki-Adi-Mundi was in the show. And to me, again, I just sort of roll with these punches to what is quote-unquote canon or what isn't, because this is just the way it has always been, and it is the way it always will be. Things will change, things will morph. What we consider canon, I think, needs to be a lot more fluid, especially when it comes to Star Wars, because when you get to the point where you are so beholden to what came before, it can be restrictive creatively to a lot of people. And while I am not necessarily a fan of Disney throwing out the old expanded universe, there was a part of me that understood why they did. Again, I'm not necessarily a fan of that decision, but I get it. I understand creatively why they wanted to clear the decks, have a clean slate for creators to come on board and tell new stories without having to work through almost 30 years worth of the expanded universe continuity, which had built up to, like, I think it covered like something like 40 years after Return of the Jedi by the time it ended. So I mean, there was a lot of canon to process. And again, I love the expanded universe. I will always love the expanded universe, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. So I miss it. But again, that being said, I understand why they did what they did. All right. I think that's all I have to say about last week's episode. Let's actually get into this week's, okay? So let's go ahead and get our episode particulars out of the way. This is Star Wars The Acolyte, Season 1, Episode 5, Night. Because after all, last week was day, so why wouldn't this be night? And again, it thematically it makes sense. Last week's episode, they talked a lot, like, hey, we have to get to Kalnakas before nightfall. That's when this forest becomes dangerous. And now that it's night, it's dangerous in more ways than one. Partially because of the Sith Stranger, but also because of what inhabits that forest. So, there you go. Makes a lot of sense. Original air date for this episode is June 25th, 2024. Written by Cora Donna and Cameron Squires. Directed by Alex Garcia Lopez. Our primary cast for this week's episode is Amanda Stenberg, J, Lee J. Jung. I always say his name backwards. Lee Jung Jae, Charlie Barnett, Daphne Keene, Manny Jacinto. Those are our primary, most important people of the episode, so we'll kind of leave it there. Our plot for this episode. In a dense jungle, the Jedi are put to the test when they confront a rising darkness. And my friends, it is a test they don't do so well with. They fail this test miserably, very miserably. But let's go ahead and get into the episode in particulars. Let's start talking about it, getting into the conversation. You know what that means. It's time. Strap on your buckets. Let's go. This is the way. So we're back on Khofar, and we kind of pick up almost immediately. Well, I shouldn't say immediately, but very shortly after our last episode ended. We saw the stranger arrive. The Jedi go to charge him, and he does that force blast, knocks our buddy back in a cloud of dust. End of the episode. We pick up with this episode, Osho waking up in her civilian costume, which still makes me laugh when I look at it, and finding the body of a dead Jedi. Now, I was a tad nervous that she was going to wake up and the fight was going to be over, because that would have really upset me. But that's not the case. After we see the first body of the dead Jedi, we get to go see the stranger in action, and I found the combat to be pretty darn impressive. I really enjoyed the fight scenes. I enjoyed the sort of unorthodox lightsaber style in which the stranger is employing against the Jedi. And honestly, he's mopping the floor with them. And it makes a fair amount of sense because, again, the Jedi haven't had anyone like this to fight in a really long time. So them getting their butts whipped is kind of par for the course, right? Again, they can't even entertain the notion of a Sith. In the last episode, when they're discussing who it is, they think it's like a rogue Jedi. And then they're up against a guy with a lightsaber, but not fighting in the conventional lightsaber forms that we have grown to know over the years. So they're completely at a loss. They don't know how to combat this guy. And then more importantly, when they do land blows on him, not only is his helmet awesome and not able to be sliced up by a lightsaber, he also has a sweet gauntlet made of cortosis. And if you're wondering, cortosis, one of those rad ideas from the old expanded universe that has now made its way back into canon. It reemerged a few years ago in the comic books, but to see it come into live action in this episode, I thought was pretty stellar because it employed my favorite things about cortosis, which was not only is it a substance that's not able to be cut by a lightsaber, but it has an energy absorption quality that will short out a lightsaber. So seeing these Jedi, landing blows or be having their blows deflected by this metal and then their lightsabers not work, I thought was really cool. So I loved that the cortosis was brought back and employed by the Sith Stranger in this episode. I thought that was a really neat element to the story. And I don't remember if it was in the lore, but him crafting the helmet out of the cortosis also makes it so the Jedi can't read him, which is very important too when it comes to the combat, because they can't anticipate what he's going to do next. And as we sort of find out through the course of the episode, not that they really could anyways, because he is something of a agent of chaos, not following rules. He's not going to follow the lightsaber forms. He's going to be kind of like this just, crazy chaos agent running around doing what the Force allows him to do, basically. So a really neat fight scene there. Just the part where he impales the one Jedi, uses a force pull to impale a second one, just skewers them, and then decapitates them. Super cool stuff. Really enjoyed it. It is funny to me. We didn't talk much about it last week, but not getting the names of these Jedi that showed up on Khofar, you definitely got the idea, the feeling that they were cannon fodder. They were the equivalent of the Star Trek red shirts. And so that's what I want to ask you guys. Are the Jedi gold vests the Star Wars equivalent of the Star Trek red shirts? Because these fools did not stand a chance against the stranger. Oh, and if you're curious about more about cortosis, I believe the first appearance of it in the old expanded universe was in Michael Stackpole's I, Jedi novel, which is one that I highly, highly recommend. It did get the Essential Legends collection treatment recently. There is an audiobook version of it out now. That's really excellent. But Michael Stackpole was one of my favorite writers of the old expanded universe, and the character he created that's in this book, Corran Horn, became one of my favorite Jedi of the Luke Skywalker's successful Jedi Academy era. And yes, that's right, friends. If you, like so many others, aren't happy with the way Luke was portrayed in the sequel series, go read the old expanded universe. He had a successful Jedi Academy where he didn't try to murder children in their sleep. It's a good time. Check it out. Highly recommend I, Jedi by Michael Stackpole. So I will pause here to sort of interject a couple thoughts really quickly about the episode because I did really like this episode. I do think it's the strongest of the show thus far, um, but it's not without a couple of bits of clunkiness. Um, I know a lot of people have been really focused on the production value of the show, and again, I don't find it as much of a hindrance as others do. But in this episode, it does feel very contained to a set. And while that's not everyone's favorite idea of a Star Wars fight sequence, it's just this is TV, baby. I don't know what to tell you. It's not going to be quite as grandiose and cinematic as we get from the films, but I still think it looks good. They're stretching that dollar, I think, in appropriate ways, and they're spending the money to make the fights look pretty darn good, in my opinion. Now, that being said, there are a couple moments in this episode with some of the fighting, particularly when Stranger and Jackie fight, but there's a couple other moments as well where the sped up portion of that combat does look a little out of place. You can tell it's been sped up and it just kind of plays chunky, clunky. So that's kind of like my little nitpick on this episode. But I like how fast paced it was. I like how many different story elements were happening, in succession. Because as we're watching the Stranger cut down the gold cloak, the gold vest Jedi cannon fodder, you get other things going on, like Jecki versus May, which was a great confrontation in Kalnaka's his little treehouse. A really good confrontation. Jecki upholding the ideals and the value of the Jedi, trying to arrest May for the murder of Vendara, of I'm blanking on the name of the other Jedi. But what really gets May fired up is when Jecki accuses her of starting the fire that kills her family. And that's when May begins to push back, and we get into some really good hand-to-hand combat between the two characters. Another strong appearance for Jecki doing Jecki things, but we're also going to see a little bit more of May, because now that May has sort of made her betrayal of the Sith Stranger, now she's kind of fearful for her life, but she has these plans to reunite with her sister, and they can go into the galaxy and do their thing. Now Jecki stands in her way. We also cut back to the Sith Stranger. Now he's going to go up against Soul. Osha isn't around. Osha's watching. Osha sees all these things. I think the back and forth of it is is handled pretty well. Again, the episode is very fast paced, and I like that. I think that works very, very well for the episode. I think we'll just cut to the chase because, again, there's a lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Again, Soul's going to go up against the Stranger. He's going to have the Yord, everyone's favorite Yord Horde. All the Yord Horders out there, it's a dark day for you. I'm sorry, friends. Soul has Yord take Osha back to the ship, removing them from the story. But it gives Osha begins to notice the forest and how it's different at night. And so it gives her a bit of an idea. She starts forming a plan here. She's calculating, thinking things through. Knows those umbaramoths are attracted to light, and that's going to be something that she can maybe take advantage of because Soul's in trouble. She's seen the Stranger kill the other Jedi pretty handily, pretty easily. She's almost died at the hands of the Stranger herself until Soul intervened and deflected that lightsaber that was coming through the woods to kill her. And again, there's a lot of great dialogue between the Stranger and Soul, both when he still has his helmet on and when he has it when it's removed later in the episode. Um, I love the way Stranger is taunting Soul. He seems to know all of Soul's secrets. The way he talks about, you know, Soul has that line where he yells at the Stranger, like, what kind of master hides his face from his pupil? And and Stranger just says, "You tell me." And it's a great line. It just shows you that the Stranger knows what's Soul's secret shame, and how to sort of cut him in a big bad way, kind of like to the core of his being. So I really like this bad guy for our Jedi. And one of the elements of this episode that I found the most interesting is, and this is going to be an element that I think it will continue to divide the fan base, is the idea of the Jedi as bad guys. That is going to rub people the wrong way. I've talked to some friends; they're already not down with the idea of the Jedi as bad guys, but the Stranger's about to call out their hypocrisy in many instances, and Brendock being the big one for Osha and May, and again being the source of Soul's secret shame. Ooh, and we get so close to learning what it is. We get so close, but it's not to be in this episode, friends. Uh, but eventually, again, back into the episode, we get Jackie versus the Stranger, and it's so good and it's so great, and Jackie's being so awesome and so cool and so wonderful and doing these great things, and you're like, oh, maybe she has the upper hand, but not so fast, my friends, because Sith Stranger, ooh, his lightsaber's got a couple of tricks up his sleeve. When he detaches the bottom and re-engages the second blade, like a little Shuto blade, and just prison shivs Jackie 3 different times. And that was my first eyes wide open, jaw agape. I couldn't believe what I just saw. I thought Jackie would be one of those characters who was going to make it through to the end of the series. No. She joins the rest of the Jedi cannon fodder on the ground, dead as a doornail. And I was like, holy smokes. They didn't just do that, because Jackie had become a fan favorite very, very quickly. But she would not be the last surprise in this episode to be one of the bodies hit the floor. No. Because eventually, as Osha forms her plan with the light and the umbaramoths, they're going to come back into the fray. Her and Yord. And Yord gets in some good blows, some good shots, some good stuff. But it's not to be for him either. Because Yord, not only does Yord die, Yord gets his neck snapped in I think the most un-Star Wars death I've ever seen so far. I can't remember anything like that in Star Wars to this point. Maybe I'm missing something, but that, Vader's force chokes some fools. But like, this is just straight up like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando killing dudes. It was crazy. And, like I said, Yord Horde, I feel for you, friends. I really, really do. But Jackie and Yord, the bodies hit the floor. My jaw hit the floor. It was intense. All right, so let's go ahead and back it up. We've talked about the deaths, but let's back it up. Get to that moment. The reveal of the man under the helmet, the Darth Teeth himself. The reveal, surprised or not, Chimere revealed to be the Sith Stranger. Now, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole in this, because some people seem to be annoyed that it was easy to solve. Leslie Headland's come out and said, like, yeah, she wanted it to be solvable. I have no problem with this. I mean, again, all the clues pointed this way. It would have been, I don't know, it would have been deceptive to the audience to have it be a red herring and just do kind of like an end around and have it be somebody else. Because again, everything pointed in this direction. So it making sense makes sense. So let's not overthink things too much on this reveal. And I want to mention how good Manny Jacinto has been, specifically in this episode. Again, he's an actor that I enjoy very, very much. Loved him on The Good Place. But to see him in this episode be so menacing, be so dark and evil, yet still kind of funny and kind of likable, and you can kind of like vibe out what he's putting out there when he's talking about the Jedi. Like you're like, yeah, yeah, I get that. That kind of tracks. It's an interesting performance. It's an interesting character, and I think Manny is just straight up killing it. So I loved seeing that. I thought he looked great in the part. Um, but it is funny too because, like a lot of other internet rumors that were going around before the show came on, seeing him in his garb, seeing the way he fights, the way he moves, I was beginning to get those Knights of Ren vibe. And he doesn't name himself Darth anything, Darth whatever. Doesn't take a Sith title. At one point, he does refer to himself as a Sith. The Jedi might consider him to be a Sith, is how he sort of phrases it. But he never really owns that necessarily. So there may be something to the speculation that like perhaps this is the beginning of the Knights of Ren. Again, something about his look, the exposed arms and that gauntlet on his left arm, and I don't know, something about it just kind of like reminded me of what I saw in the Kylo Ren comic book series that came out a few years ago, where it talks about him becoming the leader of the Knights of Ren. Something about that visually vibed with me from what I was seeing in this episode. So we'll see how it plays out. No need to go down that rabbit hole necessarily. But yes, that's the big reveal. He knows Master Soul, but Soul can't seem to place who he is. So they may have a past together, a past connection. It sounded like the Stranger at one point was at least a candidate for Jedi training, whether he was a youngling or a Padawan at any point. I guess we will hopefully find out down the road. But yeah, the insinuation is that the Stranger knows the sort of institutional rules of the Jedi. And that's what he preaches to Soul, that he wants the ability to do whatever he wants, to use his power however he wants, whether irresponsibly or not. And he doesn't want the Jedi to stop him. He talks about the Jedi and their rules. He talks about how when you don't follow the rules, you don't have to worry about breaking the rules. It's a lot of very interesting dialogues, a lot of very anti-Jedi sentiment coming from the guy. And it leads us into more of what we sort of speculated about in the third episode of the show. At this point at the end of the High Republic, do we now find the Jedi in the position of sort of policing who gets to use the Force? It's an interesting concept. It's an interesting idea, specifically to the High Republic era, because if you're following along with those books, particularly in Phase 2 of those books, where they go even further back in time, we see a Jedi Order that is, if not harmonious with other Force users, they're at least accepting of other Force users and other interpretations of the Force and how it's to be used, and the practitioners of it. Fast forward to this part of the High Republic era, this kind of tail end of this golden age of the High Republic, and we now find a Jedi Order that is not feeling that way, and adds a little bit more to what we talked about with Brendok. Did those Jedi show up because those witches were using the Force? The Jedi don't agree with what they're doing, and the Jedi were there to shut them down. Again, very on Jedi sentiments of freedom and open belief systems and things of that nature. Like this, the Jedi of this specific era seem to not be so friendly with the idea of sharing the Force with others, of embracing other ideologies and beliefs, which again feels very anti-Jedi. So if you're a big Jedi person, this show is not going to be for you, because this is about sort of looking at the cracks in the institution that has become the Jedi. As many listeners to this podcast know, that's one of my favorite things to talk about, is the cracks in the institution of the Jedi, and when exactly did they start? And this period right now, what we're seeing in this episode, may be the very beginning of the Jedi's downfall. May be what sets them up for Palpatine to do what he does to them, to wrap them in the shroud of the dark side. Again, we still need answers. We still need more out of this episode, or I'm sorry, out of the series, before we can kind of make those conclusions. But I think it's fair to say that at the very least, Sol was involved with a group of Jedi, Torben, Kelnaka, Indira, that took it upon themselves to stop other Force users. What are their reasons? What is their train of thought? Hopefully we'll get to those answers. But whatever it is, it haunts Sol. Sol feels great shame about this. And just as we were about to get the answers, he gets stunned. And so we don't get those answers. Now, I should say also, back into the episode, the fight against Kiermaier is not going well for anybody who's not Kiermaier. Or Khmer, excuse me. And it isn't until Osha's plan of using the umbaramoths. She takes Pip, she turns him into a flashlight. She knows that draws in the umbaramoths, and they attack. They attack the Sith Stranger after she pins it to his back where he can't get to it, right in the center of his back. They pick him up, haul him away. Now, again, I don't think any of us bought for an instant that the umbaramoths were going to kill him, but it brings our fight to an end and allows our story to kind of move forward once again, as we now find ourselves in a position where Osha and Sol are going to have their chat. They're going to have to put it all out there. But May steps in, stuns Sol, so that she can reunite with her sister. And it doesn't go the way that May thinks it will go, as Osha attempts to arrest her. And then we get the parent trapping of Jedi Master Sol. Because May realizes that her sister's not who she is anymore, that she's been brainwashed by the Jedi. And gives us the impression that Osha definitely doesn't know the whole story. And May knows a whole heck of a lot more of it. And at a certain point, you're kind of screaming at your TV. You're like, "Hey, just tell Osha what happened. Just let's fill in those blanks right now." But no. It'll be better for everyone if they parent trap Master Sol. So May cuts her hair, becomes Osha, puts on Osha's clothes, and leaves Osha in the woods for Kiermaier to find. Khmer to find. I'm saying his name wrong for the umpteenth time. For the Sith Stranger to find, and gain a new apprentice. Because again, it is the Parent Trap. I make fun, but it's going to be kind of interesting. My one concern is, now that May, posing as Osha, is with Sol, I would really, really like it, because I like Sol as a character. I like the way that he's being portrayed in the show as someone as a Jedi who's haunted by a mistake he made in his past. But I think he is still a good Jedi in his core, and in who he is, and he wants to help Osha. He wants to help May. He wants to make up for whatever sin he has in the past. I do truly believe that. So, in my humble opinion, I would really like it if Sol figured out pretty quickly that is not Osha, because May carries herself very differently than Osha, and I would think that that's fairly obvious to Sol. We shall see. Now, on the other side of the coin, Osha is now with the Sith Stranger, who is looking for a new acolyte, someone to not betray him, someone to follow in his footsteps and become an agent of chaos. Use the Force in whatever way they choose to use the Force. Now, why is Osha prime for this? Because Osha doesn't know what the Sith Stranger knows, and the Sith Stranger knows exactly what happened on Brendok. And the way I suspect he will phrase it to her will paint the Jedi and Master Sol in a very bad light for them, and will potentially skew her against them from this point forward. So now we also have the good twin becoming the bad twin. It's kind of flip-flopping, right? Now, I assume that May is getting close to Sol so she can kill him. But assuming Soul is as smart as I think he is, this may not go the way May thinks it'll go, and she will now get to experience his side of the story. So next week could be a very pivotal episode as we get the certain points of view from two characters on the events that took place on Brendok. We will hopefully get Soul's side of the story to May, and then we're going to get the dark side of the story from the Sith Stranger to Osha that will now potentially turn her against Soul and the Jedi. I think it's very, very interesting stuff. Now, not to be outdone, we do have Basil hot on the case, seems to suspect that May is not who she thinks she is. Again, I feel like this is the way they're going to go. Like Basil will be the one that points out to Master Soul. I do wish Soul would figure this out on his own, but whatever. At least Basil's still around. He's got Pip. Pip's still around too. So we're gonna we're gonna see May doing things that are very un-Osha like very, very quickly. Particularly if Basil just gives her back Pip. May has no idea of Osha's connection to that droid. She told that droid she loved him before she pinned him to the back of the Sith Stranger. So interesting stuff coming up. I'm really curious to see how this kind of sort of idea that they're pushing of the Jedi suppressing other Force users, extinguishing other Force users from the galaxy, kind of like doing Palpatine's bidding 100 years before Palpatine's even around. It's an interesting idea. I want to see how they play that out. I want to see how it's fleshed out. Want to see more. Want to see how the Sith Stranger will bend Osha to his side of things. I want to see if Soul is able to bring May around to his side of things. It's going to be interesting. We're going to get that Star Wars certain point of view conversation. I think there's a couple of different ways they could tell this night on Brendok. I hope they do it the way I want them to, but I usually get into trouble when I start thinking of the way things should go. So that being said, my friends, I did really enjoy this episode. I think the production value is fine. I think it's solid. Yes, you can tell it's on a stage, and yes, it's a little limited in its size, but that's just how TV works, my friends. I'm sorry it can't be the uber cinematic experience that we all know Star Wars to be, but I think they're doing a darn fine job with that. They're stretching their money and they're putting it in the right places. So I agree with that. Yes, there are chunky, clunky bits of sped up fighting, not so great. A couple pieces of dialogue that weren't so fun. The sequence when May and Osha reunite, you're a little limited on how you can shoot that because you're using body doubles for each character. So you can only have certain shots of and certain facial reaction kind of things. You can't have them share the same screen because you're probably not wasting your money on face swapping, right? I mean, maybe it'd look better because you could shoot it differently, but again, yes, it's a lot of money they spend on the show, but I want them to put it where they need it to, and face swapping, not that important to me. So yeah, shoot it the way you did. I'm okay with it. It worked out okay. Other than that, though, yeah, I really enjoyed this episode. It's fast-paced, it's quick, it's a lot of good fighting. The combat's great. I loved Yord commenting to Osha about how the Jedi can't fight against the Stranger because he doesn't follow the rules of combat, how he doesn't adhere to the forms of lightsaber combat. And again, it just sort of hits you that the Jedi haven't had a formidable Force-using foe in quite some time. So despite all their saber skills they may have, going up against a Sith warrior is not going to be something that they are prepared for, particularly one who wields his lightsaber the way that the Stranger does and uses the Force as aggressively in combat as he does. So really like that element of the episode. There's a lot of little bits and pieces of this episode that I found really fascinating. Again, talking about the Jedi and not having significant Force users to go up against as opponents. We're talking about 1,000 years, 900 years since the last time of the Sith Wars. So these Jedi are fairly complacent, right? If you're following the High Republic, they went up against the Nihil, and that was a considerable foe for them, but they weren't Force users. They weren't. It wasn't epic lightsaber battles. It was very, very different than what they're used to. So introducing this agent of chaos into a Jedi Order that knows nothing but peace and complacency, I found it fascinating. I found it really, really, really fascinating. And Yord's sort of infinite frustration with not being able to combat a character who doesn't follow the rules of combat, quote unquote. It was enjoyable. I really, really liked that aspect of it. And again, it sort of shows the folly of the Jedi for not preparing for these sort of occasions when another Force user is going to do the unexpected and the unpredictable. So I give it 8.5 buckets. I did like it. Again, there's some nitpicks, there's some clunky things here and there, but I like this episode. I think it's the best of the bunch so far, and I'm really excited to see what they do in next week's episode. This is episode 5. There's only 6, 7, and 8, baby. 3 left, and then we got to wrap it all up, right? Now, again, there's supposed to be season 2, I believe, but there's no guarantees, right? So tell your story, and let's see if we can stick the landing here. All right, Bucketheads. I think that's all I got to say about that. And I went on much, much longer than I thought I would. So, hey, that's how it goes sometimes. But this is the Mandovision Podcast. I am your host, Nargai Tom. Thank you again for checking out this small, independent Star Wars podcast. Reach out to me on the socials. I'm at Mando_Vision on Twitter, Instagram. Email the show, mandovisiontom@gmail.com. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share the show with all the Mandalorians in your covert. If possible or so inclined, please, 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 5-star reviews. Great ways to help independent shows like us stand out, not get lost in the shuffle. All right, friends, we'll be back next week. We should be back on time with the episode, Wednesday morning for you guys. That's the plan. Things going on in my home that may precipitate a change to that schedule. We're going to do the best we can. I'll keep... I'll post something on Twitter /X if I have to move the show. But the plan is you'll have the next episode Wednesday morning. All right, Bucketheads, go out there, be great Star Wars fans. Continue to be great Star Wars fans. The fandom is topsy-turvy right now, but it's the good guys and gals and people like us that make it great. So go out there and be kind, supportive, encouraging, and just the best version of yourself that you can be as a Star Wars fan. All right, Bucketheads, we'll be back next week, but this podcast can only end one way. This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way.